When I was like 14, I had a very similar experience as most 14-year-olds. Age 14 to 16, let's call it. That was when I would have seen Fargo, Pulp Fiction, Memento, Fight Club, those movies, those movies. They represented an almost, as Tarantino has pointed out, almost like a 1970s-ish kind of period of cinema.
Then we got the 70s, and then the pendulum had to swing back again for the 80s, and then the pendulum swung the other way again for the 90s. I lived through the 90s, making movies in the 90s. I didn't consider the 90s the 70s part two, but it was.
It was in retrospect.
Well, in retrospect, it absolutely was. I didn't think about it then.
Right.
Like the 80s were so commercial, franchisable, big popcorn movies, low IQ. And then the 90s kind of came back hard with like art house movies, or even studio films were making art house movies. Yeah. All the Tarantino films, it's kind of what birthed the idea of that's the 90s is what allowed for a Tarantino and a David Fincher and a Chris Nolan to kind of like come to prominence. And so much so, I actually wonder if, if the next decade, with everything, with the way that with what streaming has done to cinema, like what will the response be, the artistic response eventually be to all this trash?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think that you're starting to see it already. I think you might be on the cusp of a revitalization,
or maybe it goes to gaming or something, where even gaming's having its own like struggles, where I think they'll have an artistic response to what they're doing now.
It does feel like when you give the audience exactly what they want, they show up. But like finding ways to surprise the audience, I think that's getting trickier, like to actually capture the imaginations of the whole culture with a surprising movie.
Yeah, because it's a fine line between like surprising them and then shitting on their chest. Like you don't want to like surprise them in the wrong way.
We had two of these films last year. Barbie and Oppenheimer did that for people.
Well, Barbie, I think, that's a big franchise, big commercial movie. Yeah, it took some
Barbie's
risk.
easy. Yeah.
It took some risks, but not really, because at the end of the day, the target demo was going to kind of go in for a lot of the risks that it took. Oppenheimer, I think, is the more surprising one, where it's like, wow, like people actually, it just kind of speaks to the quality of Christopher Nolan, that he can take just about anything and interest the audience. And I didn't like, Interstellar wasn't one of his most popular films, but I think it still made a lot of money. Like he figures out a way. And that's, we talked a little bit about box office recently. EJ and I did about, like Furiosa's failure and stuff. And then this past weekend, apparently Bad Boys 4, Will Smith and Martin Lawrence made $104 million. So like that, it's really interesting because Will Smith, we thought, people would have you believe that Will Smith's career was over, but it's like, no, that guy draws money.
Yeah. People still like him. People our age,
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody wanted to go out and see it, but,
I hear they lampshade the slap in the movie and everything. So,
oh, interesting. Interesting. Yeah. He's like, all right, we have to carefully do this, but I'm willing to acknowledge the slap. But like, we didn't talk about like, there is somebody in the comments said it's so spot on. They were like, yeah, the movies are bad. Yeah. Streaming contributes to the problem. Yeah. All these issues, the movies are suffering. He's like, but also I am surprised by how many of my normie friends find out a movie already came out. They're like, oh, that's out. Like, so like the marketing isn't penetrating either.
Yeah. Well, it's super difficult to market now. I mean, it's very difficult to market to young people because nobody knows how to reach them, Yeah. Instagram and TikTok ads, that's the way that they do it. And it's lousy. It's a lousy method,
Yeah, truly.
You used to see trailers on TV all the time. Nobody's watching TV with commercials.
There was definitely a time where you knew exactly when certain movies were coming out, and you could really
not only that, because people went to the movies, I think, more frequently than they do now. You saw trailers for things that were coming, and that in turn inspired you to learn when that movie was and go see it.
And it's so weird to think about like going to the movie theater and not even knowing what movie you're going to see. Like we used to do that all the time, where you just go and you look at the list. And all of them would be kind of bangers. You just like look and you'd be like, how about we do this one today?
Yeah.
And then, I felt like there was a lot more better choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we might have been divided at various times in the country, but there weren't like two distinct Americas that no movies were for one side and all movies were for another side, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But I bring it up because those movies I described, Pulp Fiction, Donnie Darko, Fight Club, right, Goodfellas, they all belong to a certain, like, a group of, like, a film going segment of the audience that has been classically called for the last like 20 years film bros. It's a derogatory term. It's meant, to describe, I suppose, like a young white male who finds these movies novel because they're just finding them for the first time, and now they're like tastemakers, but really these are kind of like well-known films. And there's a video essay on YouTube by Eyebrow Cinema. It was posted 2 years ago, so I'm very late to the party. I had EJ and John watch it because I just kind of bumped into it, and I was like, you know what, this is a really great topic of discussion, because the video is called "The Film Bro is Dead." And he goes through, first he kind of defines, like, what do we mean when we talk about a film bro? Well, a lot of times when you hear this term, it describes, maybe there's like a woman who's having to listen to an annoying film bro go on about the genius of Pulp Fiction, and she's bored and he's an asshole, and whatever. And,
yeah, they make fun of it in Barbie, actually, that whole
right.
thing.
Oh my God, you've never seen The Godfather? This movie is a rich blend of Coppola's aesthetic genius and a triumph to Robert Evans and the architecture of the 70s studio system.
Can you start the movie over and just talk through the whole thing?
So he's like, all right, so then what he does a nice job being like, how do you define like a film bro movie? And he says, like, they're like pretty hyper masculine films in general. They have violent themes. They tend to be discovered when someone is a teen. And what I found interesting about this was, because online it became like a really unpopular thing to become a film bro. And he addresses this a little bit where he's like, well, these tend to be somewhat like, these are nerds you're talking about here. And I always chafe against that too. I'm like, why are you using the term bro? When I hear the term bro, I think of a frat person or like a sales guy, somebody who's like a douche, somebody who thinks who has like get rich quick schemes or something.
Yeah, those people are always quoting like Dodgeball and Anchorman. I don't think they're
right. They like EA sports games on the PS2. But I don't think of sweaty nerds generally. Yeah. And sometimes you'll hear tech bro too. And I'm like, oh, you must be talking about maybe like an opportunistic sales guy who doesn't know the technology but wants to sell it and make a lot of money. And then come to discover, like, they're talking about like Mark Zuckerberg. I'm like, he's a bro?
He's
pile of nerd right here.
Yes.
No social skills. He's sweaty.
Yeah. Strange. I floated this on Discord. And they were like, the bro tends to be used to just describe any male that anyone dislikes ever. I was like, oh, okay.
I guess that's kind of true.
But then as he goes on, he's like, so this term has now, because like the film bro movie doesn't get made anymore. Not really. There's not, they're like, they kind of have squashed the market for like a new Donnie Darko or Fight Club or something,
Yeah. Like Scorsese still comes out with his, and Nolan comes out with his, and
one of the key components, right, of what classically is film bro is that they're also cool. And I don't know if movies like Interstellar are cool.
Yes, there's a coolness factor, and that makes it that much more cringy or embarrassing, I suppose, if you wanted to mock these guys for, again, you got like a sweaty nerd who's watching like Reservoir Dogs, and he's like, I'm basically a Reservoir Dog,
I want to wear a suit, and then he wears a suit and he looks like awful.
Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna go
suit that's way too big. Yeah.
Or Joker would be like a modern. Yeah. Well, there you go. Like Joker comes out and people can't get over themselves with how much they hate it. So there is like a big pushback against the film bro thing. And what I liked towards the end, I was like, wow, isn't that funny how like these terms really just totally transform into nothingness and meaninglessness after a while? He's like, now it's kind of used to describe, like, sometimes it's used to describe a guy who is extremely pro like franchise commercial film. Yeah. Like somebody who only watches Marvel or something.
Kind of not even what the definition means at all. It's not even close, right?
And then he said, like, or sometimes it means somebody who watches no franchise. Like, I refuse to watch franchise movies. I'm like, oh, it can be either one. This is just somebody you hate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. Someone you hate that's in some way involved in film, like in some way enjoys film. That's all it means.
Fuck off, just all to say, fuck off.
It's like, where does that leave you? Yeah. And then he's like, that leaves you just like some like corporate trash or something. That's about it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how like video essays about film or in-depth critiques of film, there's been a lot of amazing writing on the analysis of films, but I think it's kind of like analyzing jokes to some degree. It's difficult to go through like an intellectual exercise about a medium that exists, almost expressly to bring out an emotion. Like film is not really in my estimation, it's not really an intellectual medium. It's an emotional medium.
Yes.
Like that's why those film bro movies are really effective, is because they really do kind of bring the emotion right out of you. They really do surprise and thrill you and take you on a ride. They get your attention. And
there might be formulas that usually work, or there might be story structures that usually work and things like that. But it is like how do these make you feel in the end?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that I think is kind of interesting is, I don't think that by any means this is something new, first of all. And the idea of, teenage males coming into a different part of society than they're familiar with, right? A different view on the world. I mean, it's very similar to what happens with young men who get interested in anime and get called otaku, right? It's exactly the same pattern of you connect with something that you haven't connected with before, and you get super excited about it, and all you want to do is talk about that because it's new and exciting.
Yeah.
I think it's very similar between those two ideas.
Yeah.
And it's not new. This was happening in the 60s and the 70s with different media that maybe is a little tougher for us to identify now. And it definitely still happens with anime today. Young teenagers get into anime, they get super excited about it. All they want to talk about is anime. It's the same thing.
And I get it. It can be annoying to listen to somebody think that Pulp Fiction is a movie they discovered or something, but, and I get it. Like, you don't want all of your filmmakers funneling out of the same, they're all inspired by the same 5 films or something. But the fact of the matter is, like, the only thing that's going to inspire anybody to want to tell stories is when they saw a story that affected them. And this is really, if you are interested in this topic, I definitely recommend this dude's essay, because he goes into like, it's a lot of these critiques of the film bro is true that for instance, they it can sometimes prevent them from moving through maybe more challenging movies, because sometimes like these movies feel challenging, but they're not actually all that challenging. They're kind of more pop. I don't know. It was like troubling to me, just the idea of like, we're gonna shit all over somebody who is inspired by the Joker or something.
Yeah, and to that particular point about that they may never move beyond these movies, not everybody has the intelligence and need for depth that we project onto them necessarily, right? Yeah. Maybe that's the limit of their ability to appreciate something, and that's not a sin. That's not like a fault. It's just as far as they may go. I don't think it's something that should be lambasted.
Well, if they want to make broad appeal movies that bring in money and put asses in seats,
who wants to do that?
Yeah, you don't always want to challenge people all that much.
Subscribe to Red Cow Entertainment on Patreon for full episodes every other week.